The silence in the apartment was a fragile thing. A thin sheet of glass stretched between two people. On one side stood Alexander Sterling, his expression a carefully constructed mask of defeat. On the other sat Clara Vanderbilt, his fiancée, her beautiful face a canvas of disbelief that was rapidly curdling into something else. "They fired you?" she repeated, the words sharp little stones thrown across the space between them. Alex gave a slow, deliberate nod. He watched her, his gaze steady, analytical. This was the moment, the precipice. He had spent weeks, months, walking this tightrope, and now he was intentionally stepping off. "The firm is downsizing," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. But it was a necessary poison. My position was redundant. For a heartbeat there was nothing, just the low hum of the city outside their penthouse window, a sound that had always felt like a promise. Then it happened. A small, sharp sound escaped Clara's lips. It wasn't a gasp of sympathy. It wasn't a cry of concern. It was a laugh. A short, incredulous, cutting laugh. She shook her head, a cascade of blonde hair shimmering under the recessed lighting. "Fired," she said again, the word now laced with a dark, bitter amusement. "Oh, Alex." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and he saw no partnership in her eyes. He saw only an assessment, a calculation. "Finally," she breathed, a cruel smile twisting her perfect lips. "Finally, a reason." A reason. Alex felt the word land in the quiet center of his being, not with a bang, but with the cold, heavy finality of a closing door. He had suspected, of course. He had seen the small signs, the subtle dismissals, the faint but persistent condescension from her and her family. But to hear it articulated so baldly, so swiftly, was like seeing the anatomy of a monster laid bare on a table. She wasn't just leaving him, she was relieved. The inconvenience of his perceived mediocrity was finally being resolved. He was no longer her problem. He was just a man who had been fired. In her world, that was a kind of social death. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he was not falling. He was watching her fall. Within 1 week, her entire world, built on the fragile foundations of status and wealth, would be dismantled by the very man she was now discarding. This is the part of the story where we take a quick pause. If you're finding yourself leaning in, wondering what secret Alex is holding, then you're in the right place. We love telling stories about the hidden strength people carry, about the moment the world is forced to see them for who they truly are. Do us a favor and tap that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the fallout. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to Alex and the test he just set in motion. The decision to orchestrate this elaborate deception hadn't been born from a single incident, but from 1,000 tiny cuts. It began perhaps the day he met her parents, Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt. Alex had arrived at their sprawling estate in a respectable but unremarkable sedan. He wore a well-tailored but off-the-rack suit. He was by all appearances a perfectly adequate partner for their daughter, a junior architect at a mid-sized firm, polite, educated, with a quiet ambition. But adequacy was an insult in the Vanderbilt lexicon. Richard had shaken his hand with a grip that was more of a test than a welcome, his eyes scanning Alex from head to toe in a single, dismissive sweep. An architect, he'd mused, swirling a brandy that probably cost more than Alex's monthly rent at the time. A noble profession. Building things. Of course, the real money is in owning the things that are built, not in drawing them. He'd clapped Alex on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem avuncular, but felt like a branding. Eleanor, a woman sculpted from porcelain in disapproval, had been more subtle. She'd inquired about his family, her questions circling his pedigree like a vulture. Finding no notable names, no legacy of inherited wealth or status, her interest had visibly waned. She'd smiled a thin, brittle smile, and turned the conversation to Clara's upcoming charity gala, a world of glittering names and seven-figure donations where Alex was clearly an outsider. Clara, to her credit, had defended him in those early days. "Daddy, be nice," she chided, linking her arm through Alex's. "Alex is brilliant. You should see his designs." But she never showed them his designs. She kept his professional life and her family life in two separate, carefully curated boxes. He was her respectable, slightly bohemian secret. A man she loved, perhaps, but also a man she seemed vaguely ashamed of. As their relationship deepened and marriage became the topic, the pressure intensified. The cuts became deeper. When they looked for an apartment, Clara had steered them exclusively toward buildings her father owned or had financed. "It just makes sense, darling," she'd reasoned. "We'll get a family rate." The implication was clear. He couldn't afford to live in her world without her father's help. When he'd quietly pointed out that his own savings could more than cover a down payment on a place of their own, she had patted his cheek. "Don't be silly. Why spend your money when we can use Daddy's?" He had let her have her way, watching, observing. He moved into the penthouse with her, a space that felt more like a gilded cage than a home. The art on the walls was chosen by her mother. The furniture was approved by her father's interior designer. His own contributions, a few cherished books, a framed photograph of his late parents, his worn leather portfolio, were relegated to a small office, as if his past were a clutter to be managed. The portfolio was his anchor. It was an old, soft leather case, scarred with the marks of a dozen construction sites and countless sleepless nights. Inside, it didn't hold the boring municipal projects his firm supposedly handled. It held the truth. It held the blueprints for the Sterling Tower, a revolutionary mixed-use skyscraper that had redefined the city skyline. It held the schematics for the Serafina Opera House, a building so acoustically and aesthetically perfect that it had been lauded on the international stage. It held the initial sketches for the Helios Project, a sustainable community development that was set to win every architectural award in the world. He wasn't a junior architect. He was the architect. He was Alexander Sterling, the reclusive, almost mythical founding partner of Sterling and Croft, a firm so exclusive it didn't bid on projects, it was courted. He had built his empire quietly, letting his partner, the gregarious Julian Croft, be the public face of the company. Alex preferred the work, the purity of creation, to the distracting noise of fame. He had wanted to tell Clara. 100 times the words had been on the tip of his tongue, but something always stopped him. A casual, cutting remark from her about a nouveau riche acquaintance. A dismissive comment about people who had to work for a living. A deep, instinctual feeling that the man she loved was the one she saw. The steady, slightly struggling artist, not the titan of industry. He feared that revealing the truth would change everything, that her affection, if it was real, would become tainted by the sheer scale of his success. So he decided to test it. He would remove the one thing she seemed to value most, the promise of future financial security, and see what remained. He would fake his own professional demise to witness the truth of her heart. And now he had his answer. Finally, a reason. The reason she needed to untangle herself from him without guilt. He wasn't being left because she fell out of love. He was being discarded because he was no longer a viable asset. It was clean. It was business. "A reason for what, Clara?" he asked, his voice preternaturally calm. He needed to hear her say it. He needed the final piece of data for his analysis. She stood up and began to pace, the agitation making her beautiful in a way that was almost painful to watch. "A reason for everything. For this feeling I've had that we're not on the same page. I'm aiming for the stars, Alex, and you've always been content to just look at them." She gestured vaguely around the opulent living room. "This life, my life, it requires a certain momentum. It requires two people pulling in the same direction. And now," she stopped, turning to him with an expression of pity that was 1,000 times more insulting than her laughter. "And now you've been fired. It's not your fault, I suppose, the economy or whatever, but it changes things. It has to." Alex didn't respond. He simply watched as she picked up her phone from the marble-topped console table. Her thumb flew across the screen. "I have to call my parents," she said, not looking at him. "They need to know." He knew why she was calling them. It wasn't to seek comfort or advice. It was to report a problem, to begin the official process of excising him from the Vanderbilt family narrative. He leaned back on the sofa, his hand resting on the worn leather of his portfolio sitting beside him. The first phase of the experiment was complete. The results were conclusive. Now the second phase was about to begin, the phase where the consequences would unfold, and he would be the one calmly observing the demolition. Clara's voice on the phone was a carefully modulated performance of distress. "Daddy, it's me. Something's happened." A pause. Alex could almost hear Richard's gruff, impatient voice on the other end. "It's Alex. He's been let go. Yes, fired." She listened for a moment, her eyes darting towards Alex, checking to see if he was listening. He kept his expression neutral, a blank slate upon which she could project any emotion she wished. "I know," she continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "I know, it's just, well, it's a disaster. All our plans, the wedding, everything." She began to walk towards the bedroom, seeking privacy not for Alex's sake, but to better strategize with her father. "I just don't know what to do," she lied. She knew exactly what she was going to do. Her laughter had already told him that. As the bedroom door clicked shut, Alex was left alone in the vast, impersonal living room. The silence that returned was different now. It was no longer fragile. It was heavy, dense, and filled with an unspoken truth that only he and the audience to his life understood. He looked out the window at the city lights twinkling below. From this height, the cars on the streets were like blood cells flowing through arteries. It was a living, breathing system. He had designed two of the major organs of that system, the towers that now pierced the night sky, their lights shining brighter than all the others. He thought about the lie he had told. My position was redundant. It was, in a way, the truest thing he had said all night. The role he had been playing in Clara's life, the role of the aspiring, slightly less than partner, had indeed become redundant. It was no longer necessary. He had gathered all the information he needed from it. Clara's immediate reaction had been more telling than a decade of conversations could ever be. There was no, "Are you okay?" No, "We'll get through this together." Her first thought was not of him, but of the disruption to her narrative. The smooth, upward trajectory she had envisioned for her life had hit a bump, and the bump was him. Her instinct was not to help him over it, but to swerve around him and keep driving. He heard her voice muffled from the other room. It was rising slightly in pitch, the manufactured sympathy giving way to genuine frustration. She was talking about appearances, about the embarrassment. "What will people say? The wedding is only 6 months away," she lamented to her mother, who was likely now on the conference call. Alex slowly ran a hand over the supple leather of his portfolio. Inside, nestled among the revolutionary designs that were changing the face of modern architecture, was a small, simple folder. It contained no blueprints. It contained documents. Bank statements showing a net worth that would make her father's fortune look like pocket money. It contained the incorporation papers for Sterling and Croft. And, on top of everything, it contained a preliminary deed for a 20-acre plot of land overlooking the ocean. The very plot Richard Vanderbilt had recently boasted about keeping an eye on for Alex and Clara's future home. Alex had quietly purchased it 6 months ago using a shell corporation. He hadn't bought it as a trap. He had bought it for her. He had envisioned revealing his success to her on that very piece of land, showing her the breathtaking home he had already designed for them, a home that would be a testament to his love and his life's work. He wanted to give her everything, but only after he was sure she wanted him. The bedroom door opened, and Clara emerged, her face set with a new, grim determination. She had received her instructions. "My parents want to see us," she announced, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "We're having dinner with them tonight. They want to help." Alex knew what kind of help the Vanderbilts offered. It was the kind that came with strings, with expectations, with a hefty price to be paid in dignity. "That's not necessary, Clara," he said, his voice even. "Yes, it is," she snapped. "You don't seem to understand the position you put me in. We are a team, or we were supposed to be. My family is a resource, and you're in no position to be proud right now. You need help. So you will come to dinner, you will be gracious, and you will listen to what my father has to say." He looked at her, at this stranger standing in the apartment he paid for, wearing clothes he'd bought her, outlining the terms of his surrender. He felt a profound sense of sorrow, a deep, aching grief for the woman he thought he loved, the woman who had never really existed. "All right, Clara," he said softly, rising from the sofa. He picked up his portfolio, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hand. "I'll come to dinner." He would be gracious. He would listen. He would play his part as the fallen man, just a little longer. He would let them build their scaffold of arrogance and condescension as high as they wished. He knew, with the certainty of an architect who understands structural integrity, that the higher they built it, the more devastating the collapse would be when he finally kicked out the foundations. And he would do it not with anger or vengeance, but with the simple, irrefutable power of the truth. The drive to the Vanderbilt estate was thick with a tense, suffocating silence. Clara stared out her window, her jaw tight, while Alex drove the car he supposedly could no longer afford. He handled the vehicle with his usual calm precision, his knuckles not white on the steering wheel, his breathing even. He was an island of tranquility in her sea of agitated resentment. Every so often she would glance at the leather portfolio resting on the back seat, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. It was his constant companion, that worn case, and in her current mood it seemed to her like a pathetic symbol of the failed career it represented. They were met at the door not by a butler, but by Richard Vanderbilt himself. This was not a gesture of warmth, but a strategic move to establish immediate control. He was a large man, softened by wealth but still projecting an aura of brutish power. He ignored Alex completely at first, placing his hands on Clara's shoulders. "My poor girl," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Don't you worry, we'll sort this all out." He then turned to Alex, his eyes cold and appraising. "Alexander, come in. Eleanor is waiting in the drawing room." It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. The drawing room was a museum of Vanderbilt prestige. Dark wood paneling, ancestral portraits staring down with disapproving eyes, and furniture that was priceless but profoundly uncomfortable. Eleanor was seated on a brocade sofa, a sherry glass held delicately in her long fingers. She offered Alex a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Alex, dear," she began, her voice like the tinkling of ice in an empty glass. "We were so devastated to hear your news. It's a terrible, terrible thing to happen to a young man. So destabilizing." "Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate your concern," Alex replied, his tone perfectly level. He remained standing, a subtle refusal to place himself in a supplicant's position on the lower, softer chairs. Richard bypassed the pleasantries. He walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a generous scotch. "Let's not dance around it," he boomed, turning to face Alex. "You've lost your job. You're engaged to my daughter. That makes you my problem. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "Dad," Clara murmured, a faint blush on her cheeks. This was blunter than even she had anticipated. "No, Clara," Richard said, waving a dismissive hand. "There's no time for coddling. The world is run by men who face facts. And the fact is, Alex's prospects have evaporated." He took a long swallow of his drink, his eyes fixed on Alex over the rim of the glass. "I've been thinking. I have a position in my logistics division, warehouse management. It's not glamorous, mind you. You'd be starting at the bottom, but it's a steady paycheck, honest work. It would allow you to hold your head up, to provide for my daughter in a basic capacity." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the offer hung in the air. Warehouse management. He was offering a man who designed skyscrapers a job counting boxes. It wasn't an offer of help, it was a leash. A way to bring Alex fully under his control, to transform him from a potential equal into a lowly employee. Alex's gaze did not waver. He didn't flush with anger or stammer in protest. He simply absorbed the insult with the same calm he absorbed everything else. "That's a very generous offer, Richard," he said, the words smooth and measured. "But I think I'd prefer to explore my options in my own field first." Eleanor let out a small, pitying sigh. "Oh, Alex, we admire your pride, we truly do. But Richard is right, you have to be realistic. Architecture is a luxury. People will always need things moved from one place to another. It's practical." "What Eleanor means," Richard cut in, "is that you can't afford to be proud. You have a responsibility to Clara. You made a commitment. Did you ever stop to think how this would affect her? Her standing, the wedding we're supposed to be planning?" This was the core of it, not his well-being, but the disruption to their social calendar. "The wedding is the least of my concerns right now," Alex stated simply. "My primary focus is on securing my professional future." Clara, who had been silent, finally spoke up, her voice sharp with betrayal. "The least of your concerns? Alex, how can you say that? Our entire life is the concern. My father is offering you a lifeline and you're too proud to take it?" "It's not about pride, Clara," he said, turning his calm gaze to her. "It's about purpose. I'm an architect. That's who I am. It's not just what I do." Richard scoffed, setting his glass down with a loud thud. "Purpose doesn't pay the bills, son. Let me be blunt. As things stand, you are not in a position to marry my daughter. You can't provide the life she is accustomed to. You can't even provide the life you had yesterday. You come into my house, engaged to my only child, with no job and no prospects. The only thing you seem to have is this stubbornness." He gestured angrily toward Alex. "I'm offering you a way out, a way to maintain a shred of dignity. You take the job, you work hard, and in a few years, maybe you'll be managing a whole distribution center. It's a respectable path for a man in your situation." Each word was a carefully sharpened barb, designed to humiliate, to diminish, to force him into submission. They saw him as a failure, and they were relishing the opportunity to reshape him into something more suitable, something they could own. Alex looked from Richard's florid, angry face to Eleanor's cold, pitying one, and finally to Clara's, which was a storm of frustration and embarrassment. He saw them not as a family, but as a board of directors assessing a failing asset, and he felt nothing but a vast, cold clarity. The love he thought he had for Clara was a ghost, and he was finally seeing it for what it was. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I understand your position," he said. The ambiguity in the statement was lost on them. They heard surrender. "Thank you for dinner, and for the advice." He turned to Clara. "Are you ready to go?" Clara was taken aback. She had expected a fight, a breakdown, a pleading acceptance. His calm refusal to engage on their terms was infuriating. "We're not finished here, Alex." "I am," he replied quietly. "There's nothing more to be said tonight." He walked out of the drawing room, leaving them in a stunned, indignant silence. He didn't wait for Clara. He walked down the long, marble-floored hallway, past the portraits of dead Vanderbilts, and out the heavy oak door into the cool night air. He had endured the intervention. He had listened to their insults. He had taken their measure, and he had found them wanting. The game was far from over, but he had just made his next move, and they didn't even realize they were playing. The ride back to the apartment was a tomb of cold fury. Clara didn't speak a word until the moment the door was closed behind them. Then the dam broke. "How could you?" she hissed, whirling on him. Her face was pale with rage. "How could you embarrass me like that? In front of my own parents?" "Embarrass you?" Alex asked, his voice still unnervingly quiet. He placed his portfolio on the hall table. "I was the one being offered a job as a box packer, Clara. I would think the embarrassment was mine." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she shot back. "My father was trying to help you. He was offering you a safety net, a way to salvage some shred of your life, and you threw it back in his face. You and your pathetic pride." "It wasn't help, Clara. It was a demotion. It was a way for him to control me, and by extension, you." "Control you?" She laughed, the sound just as harsh and humorless as it had been hours earlier. "Someone needs to. You just lost your job. You have nothing, Alex. No income, no prospects, nothing. My family is the only thing standing between you and complete failure. And you have the audacity to act insulted?" He looked at her, and the last vestiges of his affection withered and died. He saw her clearly now, stripped of all illusion. She was her parents' daughter, through and through. Her values were their values: status above substance, wealth above worth, appearance above all. "I won't be taking your father's offer," he said, his voice flat and final. "I will find my own way." "Your own way?" she scoffed, advancing on him. "What way is that? Begging for scraps from other firms? Are you going to be a freelance draftsman living off my family's generosity? Number one, I won't allow it. I will not have my life dragged down because you're too proud to accept reality." The argument raged for another hour. It was ugly and circular. She accused him of selfishness, of pride, of failing her. He remained a fortress of calm, his quiet refusals and simple statements of fact acting as an impenetrable wall against her fury. Finally, exhausted and incandescent with rage, she delivered her ultimatum. "You have 1 week, Alex," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. 1 week to come to your senses and accept my father's offer. If you don't, then we are done. I will not marry a man with no ambition and no future. I will not be the wife of a failure." She stormed into the master bedroom and slammed the door. The sound echoed in the cavernous apartment. A week. She had given him a deadline for his capitulation. He smiled, a thin, mirthless smile. A week was more than enough time. Later that night, long after the apartment had fallen silent, Alex sat in his small office. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the towers of the city he had helped build. He opened his leather portfolio. He bypassed the deeds and the financial statements. He pulled out a set of blueprints, the ink on them still fresh. They were for a house, a magnificent structure of glass and steel and warm wood, designed to be perched on a cliffside, embracing the ocean view. It was a home designed for two, with a studio that opened onto a private garden and a library with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the home he had designed for them, for him and Clara. He stared at the drawings for a long time, a wave of melancholy washing over him. It was a beautiful dream, but the person he had designed it for was not real. With a sigh, he carefully rolled up the blueprints and placed them aside. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It was late, but he knew his partner would be awake. "Julian," he said when the call was answered, "it's me." "Alex." Julian Croft's voice was warm and energetic, a stark contrast to the coldness of the Vanderbilt mansion. "Everything all right? You sound pensive." "Everything is proceeding as planned," Alex said. "The test was a success, or a failure, depending on your perspective." There was a pause. "She showed her colors then?" "In spectacular fashion," Alex confirmed, "along with her parents. I've been offered a position in warehouse management." Julian let out a low whistle. "Wow, they really don't know who they're dealing with, do they?" "No," Alex said. "They don't. and I need to make sure they understand the full scope of their miscalculation. Are the preparations for the Helios announcement ready? Ready to go at your command, my friend. The press releases are drafted, the board is aligned, and the city officials are waiting for our final go-ahead. When you give the word, we change the world of urban development. Good, Alex said. There's one more thing. I need you to do something for me. It's a bit theatrical, but I feel the situation calls for it. He outlined his plan, his voice low and precise. He needed Julian to be his unexpected ally, the final piece of the puzzle he was assembling. Consider it done, Julian said, a note of excitement in his voice. This is going to be better than any building launch. What's the timing? Alex looked out the window at the plot of land he owned, the land Richard Vanderbilt thought was his to give. This weekend, he said, the Vanderbilts are planning a little family gathering on site to discuss the modest home they're going to build for us. I think it's the perfect venue for a groundbreaking ceremony of a different sort. They finalized the details and Alex hung up. He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The grief was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. He was no longer just conducting an experiment, he was now a force of nature, a quiet storm that had gathered strength in secret and was now ready to make landfall. And the House of Vanderbilt, built on its foundations of arrogance and pride, was directly in its path. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological theater. Alex played the part of the broken man to perfection. He stayed in the apartment, ostensibly sending out resumes, which in reality consisted of him coordinating the final, intricate details of his impending revelation with Julian. He was quiet, subdued, and unfailingly polite. He agreed with everything Clara said, his meekness a stark contrast to his defiance at her parents' home. Clara, believing she had broken his will, treated him with a cloying, condescending pity. She would leave articles on the kitchen counter about reinventing your career after 40, even though he was only 32. She talked on the phone loudly to her friends, complaining in hushed tones about how difficult things were, how she was supporting Alex through a tough time, painting herself as a martyr. I've had to put a hold on the caterers for the wedding, she told him one evening, her tone suggesting she was making a great sacrifice. And I spoke to the jeweler. We might need to reconsider the ring, just until you're back on your feet, of course. The engagement ring, a flawless diamond that her father had secured at a favorable price, was a symbol of her status. The idea of it being connected to a man who was unemployed was clearly abhorrent to her. Of course, Alex said, his eyes on the book he was pretending to read. Whatever you think is best, Clara. Her condescension was a constant, low-grade hum in the apartment. She would helpfully suggest he wear a different tie for his interviews, or critique the way he answered the phone. Each suggestion was a small assertion of her superiority, a reminder of his new, diminished status. He absorbed it all, his patience a deep, unrippled pool. He was gathering grievances, not out of a desire for revenge, but for the sake of clarity. When the time came, he wanted her and her family to have a perfect, unvarnished mirror held up to their behavior. He wanted them to see themselves as he now saw them. The catalyst for the final act was a call from Richard Vanderbilt. He didn't call Alex, he called Clara, who put him on speakerphone. Good news, Richard's voice boomed from the phone. I pulled some strings, cleared my weekend. We're all going to head out to the North Shore property on Sunday morning, the one I've had my eye on. Alex felt a cold thrill. The stage was being set. I've had my architect, a good man, practical, draw up some preliminary sketches for a house for you two, Richard continued. Nothing ostentatious. A solid, respectable home. Something you can afford the upkeep on with your new salary, Alex. The jab was deliberate, a reminder of the warehouse job that was still, in Richard's mind, the only option on the table. We'll walk the property, look at the plans, and get the ball rolling. It's time to focus on the future, That sounds wonderful, Daddy, Clara said, shooting Alex a triumphant look. This was it, the manifestation of her family's power to provide, to control, to save him from himself. Be ready at 10 a.m. Sunday, Richard commanded. And Alex, he added, his voice dropping, bring a positive attitude. This is a gift. Try to be grateful. The line went dead. Clara turned to him, her expression softening for the first time in days. See, Alex? Everything is going to be okay. My father is taking care of us. All you have to do is say yes. I'll be ready at 10, Alex said, closing his book. He stood up and walked to his office, the quiet before the storm settling around him. He could feel the tension in the air, the coiled energy of a story about to break. He was not just going to a property viewing, he was going to a reckoning. On Sunday, on that beautiful piece of land overlooking the sea, he would not be receiving a gift. He would be giving one. A lesson delivered with surgical precision that they would never forget. He picked up his leather portfolio, the symbolic weight of it more potent than ever. It contained everything, his past, his present, and the future they were about to lose. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was the kind of day that felt full of promise, a perfect backdrop for the drama that was about to unfold. Alex dressed simply, in dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored linen jacket. He was the image of quiet elegance, a man at peace with himself. When he emerged from the bedroom, Clara was already waiting, dressed in an expensive, cream-colored pantsuit that was entirely impractical for walking a plot of undeveloped land. It was an outfit for an audience, not for an activity. "Are you bringing that thing?" she asked, her nose wrinkling in distaste as he picked up his leather portfolio. "I am," he said simply. She sighed, a put-upon sound. "Fine, let's just go. My parents are already on their way." The drive was punctuated by Clara's cheerful monologue about the house. She speculated on the number of bedrooms, the size of the kitchen, the kind of garden her mother would help her design. She spoke as if Alex were not there, planning her future in a home paid for by her father, a home that would be his reward for accepting his new, lower station in life. Alex listened, offering no comment, his silence an unnerving counterpoint to her excited chatter. They arrived at a private gate, which swung open to reveal a long, winding gravel road that climbed through a grove of windswept cypress trees. The road opened up onto a stunning plateau of land. It was 20 acres of pristine coastal bluff, covered in wildflowers and native grasses, with panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean stretching out to the horizon. The air was clean and smelled of salt and sage. It was, by any measure, a piece of paradise. Richard's black Mercedes was already parked near the edge of the bluff. He and Eleanor were standing there, looking out at the view. Richard was dressed in golf attire, a potent symbol of his leisurely power. Eleanor wore a sun hat and a look of serene ownership. "Ah, there they are," Richard boomed as Alex and Clara approached. "What do you think? Not bad, eh? Best piece of coastline left in the state." "It's breathtaking, Daddy," Clara said, kissing him on the cheek. Richard clapped Alex on the shoulder, the same gesture of condescending ownership as when they first met. "Well, Alex, a view like this almost makes a man want to work hard, doesn't it?" "It's a beautiful piece of land, Richard," Alex said, his voice calm and even. He looked out at the ocean, his gaze distant, as if seeing something they couldn't. "It is," Richard said, beaming with pride. "And it's going to be yours. Well, Clara's. A wedding gift from her mother and me." He unrolled a set of blueprints he'd been holding. "Now let's talk about the house." He spread the plans across the hood of his car. "My architect, Bill Finch, a very practical fellow, has drafted a lovely little Cape Cod style. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. Very respectable. Sturdy. We can have it built in under a year. It's not a palace, mind you, but it's a fine start for a young couple. A home you can be proud of, Alex. Something you can actually manage." This was it, the final patronizing move in their game. He was not just giving them a house. He was dictating its style, its size, its very essence, all based on his contemptuous assessment of Alex's worth. He was designing Alex's future, and it was a small, practical, respectable box. Alex looked at the competent but uninspired drawings. He saw a house, not a home. He saw a monument to mediocrity, a physical manifestation of the small life they had planned for him. Clara was ecstatic. "Oh, Daddy, it's perfect. It's so charming." Eleanor smiled. "It has good bones, and the landscaping possibilities are endless." They were all looking at him, waiting for his reaction, waiting for the gratitude, the relief, the final, humble acceptance of his place in their world. Richard's face was smug, Clara's was expectant, Eleanor's was coolly satisfied. Alex took a slow breath, tasting the salt in the air. The quiet before the storm was over. He turned his gaze from the blueprints to Richard. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap. Richard's smile froze. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no," Alex repeated, his voice still calm, but now with an edge of steel. "We will not be building this house here." Clara stared at him aghast. "Alex, what are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" "On the contrary, Clara," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "I've never been more sane in my life. I've been living in a fog for the past 2 years, but the last week has brought a startling clarity." Richard's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "Now you listen to me, you ungrateful punk. I am gifting you a multi-million-dollar property and a home, and you have the nerve to say no? That's the first of your many miscalculations, Richard," Alex said, his calm beginning to unnerve them more than any shouting match could. "You can't gift me something that I already own." He reached into his leather portfolio. He didn't pull out blueprints or sketches. He pulled out a single, folded document. He unfolded it and held it up. It was a grant deed. "I purchased this land 6 months ago through a privately held LLC," Alex stated, his voice ringing with an authority they had never heard before. "All 22.5 acres. The name on the deed, as you can see, is Sterling Holdings, my holding company." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the cry of a distant gull and the soft rustle of the wind through the grass. Richard stared at the document, his mouth slightly agape. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. Clara just stared at Alex, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing and hearing. That's not possible," Richard stammered, his bravado crumbling. "This parcel wasn't even officially on the market. I was negotiating a private sale with the estate." "You were negotiating with a representative of the estate," Alex corrected him gently. "I was negotiating with the owners directly. They preferred my offer and my vision." He folded the deed and slid it back into his portfolio. "So, while I appreciate the thought, Richard, I must decline your generous offer to build a house for me on my own land." This was the first tremor. The ground beneath their feet, which they had assumed was solid rock, had just turned to sand. But Alex was just getting started. The quiet bomb had been dropped, and now he was going to calmly walk them through the blast radius. Clara was the first to find her voice, a high, strained whisper. "Alex, what is this? Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke, Clara," he said, turning to her. His eyes were not angry. They were filled with a profound, aching sadness. "This is the truth. A truth I've kept hidden because I was afraid of what it would do to us. I wanted you to love me, the man, not the portfolio. I needed to know if what we had was real." He then began the list of grievances. His voice was not accusatory, but factual, like an auditor reading a report. "When you laughed, Clara, the moment I told you I was fired," that was the first entry. "You said, 'Finally, a reason to leave without guilt.' You didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't offer support. You felt relief." Clara flinched as if struck. He turned to Richard and Eleanor. "When you invited me to your home, it wasn't to help. It was to humiliate. You offered me a job managing a warehouse, Richard. You, who prides himself on knowing men, looked at me and saw a man who counts boxes. You judged my worth based on a lie I told to test the character of your daughter. You lied to us? Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. I created a control for an experiment, Alex corrected her. The hypothesis was that your family's affection and respect were conditional, based entirely on wealth and status. The results of the experiment have been conclusive. He continued, his voice steady, relentless. You advised Clara to reconsider our engagement ring because an unemployed fiancé was an embarrassment. You talked about my evaporated prospects and my lack of ambition. You never once asked about my work, my passion, my designs. You only asked about my pedigree and my paycheck. You saw a deficit. You failed to see the asset. Richard, recovering a sliver of his bluster, stepped forward. Asset? What asset? So you got lucky and flipped a piece of land. It doesn't change the fact that you're unemployed. Alex allowed a small, wry smile to touch his lips. That is the second and far more significant of your miscalculations. He paused, letting the moment hang in the air. I was not fired, Richard. It is impossible for me to be fired from my own company. He reached into his portfolio again. This time he pulled out a sleek, minimalist brochure. The cover read simply, Sterling and Croft. He handed it to Richard. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were glossy, stunning photographs of buildings he knew well. The Sterling Tower, the city's most prestigious corporate address. The Serafina Opera House, the cultural jewel of the West Coast. The award-winning Museum of Modern Form. Sterling and Croft, Richard breathed, the name catching in his throat. He looked up at Alex, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Your name is Sterling, Alexander Sterling. The founding partner and lead designer, Alex confirmed quietly. My partner, Julian Croft, handles the public-facing side of the business. I prefer to focus on the work. The small, mid-sized firm I told you I work for was a fiction. A story to allow me to live a normal life, to see if I could find something real. Clara made a small, choking sound. Her entire reality was fracturing, piece by piece. The man she had pitied, the failure she was about to discard, was the architect of the very world she aspired to. The buildings her friends raved about, the galas she attended that were hosted in his lobbies, the city skyline she admired from her penthouse window, he had built it. As if on cue, a sleek black helicopter appeared in the distance, flying low over the coastline. It was not a commercial tour helicopter. It had the clean, sharp lines of a private executive craft. It grew closer, the thumping of its rotors cutting through the stunned silence. It did not pass by. It began a slow, deliberate descent, landing smoothly in a wide, flat clearing about 100 yards away. The door slid open, and a man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, ducking under the slowing blades. He walked towards them with an easy, confident stride, holding a tablet. It was Julian Croft. Julian stopped beside Alex, ignoring the Vanderbilts completely. He smiled warmly at his partner. Ready for the presentation, Alex? He asked. I believe so, Julian, Alex replied. Julian tapped the screen of his tablet. A beam of light shot out, and a three-dimensional, holographic model of a house shimmered into existence in the air between them. It was breathtaking. A soaring, multi-leveled structure of glass, steel, and stone that seemed to grow organically from the cliffside. It had infinity pools that blended into the horizon, vast walls of glass that erased the line between inside and out, and a roof line that echoed the waves of the ocean below. It was not a house. It was a masterpiece. It was the home Alex had designed. This, Alex said, his voice soft, gesturing to the hologram, is the house I was going to build. The one I designed for Clara, for us. The contrast between this radiant, visionary structure and the stodgy, practical Cape Cod on Richard's blueprints was not just an architectural disagreement. It was a chasm between two worlds, between two value systems. It was the physical manifestation of everything they had failed to see. The Vanderbilts were speechless. They stared at the holographic mansion, then at Alex, then back again. The scale of their error, the sheer magnitude of their misjudgment, was finally crashing down on them. Clara was the first to break, her mind scrambling to recalibrate, to salvage the unsalvageable. She took a hesitant step toward Alex, her face a mask of pleading disbelief. A shaky, desperate laugh escaped her lips. "Alex, honey," she began, her voice trembling as she reached for his arm. This is incredible. Why didn't you tell us? This whole time, you were testing us? Oh, you silly man, it was just a silly test." She tried to frame it as a joke, a lover's misunderstanding, a prelude to a happy ending. Alex gently moved his arm away from her touch. The gesture was not unkind, but it was utterly final. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the full depth of the chasm that had opened between them. It was not filled with anger, but with an immense, irrevocable disappointment. "It wasn't a silly test, Clara," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "It was the most important question of my life. I needed to know if the person I loved would stand by me in the dark, if she would choose me when I had nothing, or so she thought." He paused, letting the truth settle. "Your laughter gave me the answer. The way you and your parents treated me this past week, it confirmed the data." "No," she whispered, shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. It was not sorrow for him or for their lost love, but sorrow for herself, for the spectacular future she had just fumbled. "No, Alex, I love you. I was just scared, confused." It was a shock. "Were you scared for me, or for your social standing?" he asked, the question a surgeon's scalpel, precise and deep. "Were you confused, or were you relieved to have an excuse to end things?" I think we both know the answer. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out another document or a key. He simply stood there for a moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he took her left hand. Her fingers were cold. Gently, he slid the enormous diamond engagement ring from her finger. It felt weightless, a meaningless piece of carbon. "I believe you were thinking of reconsidering this," he said, placing the ring in her palm and closing her fingers around it. "I've made the decision for you." The finality of the act was absolute. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a conclusion. He then turned his attention to Richard, who was staring at him with a mixture of fear and a dawning, horrified respect. "Richard," Alex said, his tone shifting from personal to professional, "your company, Vanderbilt Logistics, has been losing market share for 3 consecutive quarters. Your primary competitor has been undercutting your prices by leveraging a more advanced, automated sorting technology. You've taken on significant debt to maintain your fleet, and 2 of your largest contracts are up for renewal next month." Richard's face went pale. Alex was not guessing. He was stating facts. "Sterling and Croft is the primary investor in the tech company that has been eating your lunch," Alex continued, his voice devoid of malice. "Furthermore, my firm is breaking ground next month on the Helios project. It's the largest private development in the history of this state. It will require a logistics and shipping partner of unprecedented scale. The contract is estimated to be worth 9 figures over the next decade." He let that sink in. He let Richard connect the dots. The lifeline his company desperately needed. The contract that would not just save him, but make him more powerful than ever. "Julian and I were prepared to offer that contract to you, Richard. We were going to create a strategic partnership. I wanted to merge our families not just by marriage, but by business. I wanted to build something together." Alex looked at the older man, at his collapsed arrogance and dawning terror. "But a partnership requires respect. It requires trust. And it requires the vision to see value where it's not immediately obvious. You have, I'm afraid, failed on all three counts. He gave a slight nod to Julian. We will be moving forward with another partner. The words were a death sentence for Richard's company, not a loud, angry condemnation, but a quiet, factual statement of consequences. Richard had been offered the keys to the kingdom by the man he tried to put in a warehouse, and he had thrown them away. Eleanor, who had been a frozen statue of horror, finally spoke, her voice a reedy plea. Alexander, please, we made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Don't do this to our family. Don't do this to Clara. Alex looked at the three of them, a broken family unit standing on a piece of land that represented the scale of their misjudgment. He felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it was distant, academic. This isn't something I am doing to you, he said, his voice softening slightly, becoming the moral center of the storm. This is the result of the choices you made. You value appearances over character. You value wealth over worth. You taught your daughter that a man's measure is the size of his bank account, and she learned the lesson well. He looked at Clara, her face streaked with tears of self-pity. I truly hope, for your sake, that you learn a different lesson from this. I hope you find something real, but you won't find it with me. With a final, sad look at the woman he once thought he would spend his life with, Alex turned his back on them. Let's go, Julian, he said. Together, the two partners walked away from the stunned, silent Vanderbilts. They walked across the grassy bluff toward the waiting helicopter, its blades beginning to spin faster, whipping up the wind. They didn't look back. They were walking toward the future, a future Alex had built with his own hands and his own integrity. Behind them, Clara sank to her knees, the useless diamond ring clutched in her hand. Her father stared blankly at the holographic masterpiece of a house, a ghost of a future he had destroyed. Eleanor looked at her daughter, then at her husband, and then at the receding figures of the two men, realizing with sickening certainty that they had just been relegated to the past. They were left alone on that beautiful, empty piece of land, surrounded by nothing but the consequences of their own arrogance. The sun was still bright, the sky was still blue, but for the Vanderbilts, the world had suddenly gone irrevocably dark. Months passed, the seasons turned. The wind-swept bluff overlooking the ocean was no longer empty. The house of glass and steel and stone began to rise, a testament to a vision that had refused to be compromised. It grew not as a monument to revenge, but as a sanctuary of peace. Alex was there often, walking the site not with clients or investors, but alone, overseeing every detail with the quiet focus of a true artist. He had not built it for two, after all. He had redesigned it for one. The master suite was still there, but the second one had become a vast, two-story library filled with books on art, history, and philosophy. The garden studio was larger, a space for pure, unencumbered creation. He was a different man. The quiet patience was still there, but it was no longer a shield. It was a source of strength. The sadness had faded, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of peace. He had faced the ghost of his past and had chosen his own future. The world now knew who he was. The Helios Project had been announced to global acclaim. Sterling and Croft was no longer a myth, but the undisputed leader in its field. The name Alexander Sterling was synonymous with genius and integrity. He handled the newfound fame with the same grace he had handled the feigned obscurity, deflecting praise and focusing on the work. He never heard from the Vanderbilts directly, but news, like water, always finds a way to flow. Vanderbilt Logistics, unable to secure the Helios contract or any other of a similar scale, was forced into a fire sale. Richard sold the company for a fraction of its former worth to the very competitor that had been dismantling it. The Vanderbilt name, once a symbol of social power, became a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and charity galas. They had to sell the estate, downsizing to a respectable but far less grand home in the city. Clara, he heard, had tried to reinvent herself. For a time, she attempted to spin the story, to portray herself as the tragic muse of the great Alexander Sterling, the woman who had inspired him through a painful, dramatic breakup. But the narrative never took hold. Those who knew the truth, or had heard the rumors, saw her not as a muse, but as a fool. She had held the winning lottery ticket and had thrown it away because she didn't like the color of the paper it was printed on. The last Alex heard, she was dating a hedge fund manager, a man with an impeccable pedigree and a portfolio that was, by all accounts, impressive. But those who saw them together noted a certain desperation in her eyes, a frantic need to prove that she had recovered, that she had won. She was chasing a life that she had already held in her hands and let slip away. One evening, Alex stood on the nearly completed balcony of his new home. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The house was quiet, filled with the promise of a life to be lived on his own terms. Julian came and stood beside him, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "To the house on the hill," Julian said, handing him a glass. "To the house on the hill," Alex echoed, his voice content. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" Julian asked quietly. "The way it ended, the collateral damage." Alex considered the question, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I regret the pain," he said honestly. "I regret that the woman I thought I loved didn't exist. But I don't regret finding out the truth. The damage wasn't collateral, Julian. It was the direct and necessary outcome of their own choices. I just provided the catalyst. They provided the character." He took a sip of his whiskey, the smooth, smoky flavor a welcome warmth. "I learned something," he continued, more to himself than to Julian. "True worth isn't something you can display. It's not in a bank account or a title or a family name. It's in your integrity. It's in who you are when no one is watching, and what you're willing to stand for when you think you have nothing left to lose." He had pretended to lose everything, and in doing so, he had gained himself. The Vanderbilts, who thought they had everything, had lost their illusions, their status, and their future, all because they could not see the value of the man standing right in front of them. It was a lesson in perspective, a stark reminder that the most impressive structures are not always the ones that touch the sky, but the ones built on a foundation of unshakable character. And so our story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that respect is earned, not demanded, and that a person's true value is often hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Alex didn't seek revenge, he sought truth, and the consequences that followed were simply the natural order of things reasserting itself. What do you think? Was Alex right to test Clara and her family in such a dramatic way? Or was there another path he could have taken? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspectives truly enrich this community. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more stories about hidden strength, quiet triumphs, and the satisfying turn of the karmic wheel. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.